My name is David Paris. I'm the Global BFSI partner for InfoPercept, and would like to welcome you to today's webinar. I have the good fortune to welcome both some former colleagues from days past, as well as my more recent colleagues that I've joined from InfoPercept. We'll be focusing on cyber resilience in financial services and the online gaming industry today. And would like to welcome you all to thank you for joining us, and hopefully you will find this session as useful as we found it putting together. So Jaydeep, if you can move on now to the table of contents slide. The key three areas that we will focus on in today's session are, first of all, baselining certain key cybersecurity service types and the kind of value that they provide overall. Secondly, we will identify 2 to 3 basic precepts that help achieve information resilience, especially in a cybersecurity and information security focused environment and challenges. And then thirdly, we will explore a global securities exchange and online gaming examples that relate in particular to the kind of precepts that are the second topic. And then after that, we will focus on some of the things in particular that InfoPercept has as far as experience in these areas. So Jaydeep, thank you for advancing. So this slide focuses on the first of those topics, which talks about certain standard types of cybersecurity services currently available in the industry and the types of personnel and teams and skills that provide those. At the left-hand side, you find the different team colors. Blue teams focusing on XDR types of services that focus on incident detection and response. Next level of service is for XDR Plus, which looks to prevent the types of events that have been detected under XDR types of examples and making the responses more accurate and agile. The third example is OXDR provided by Red Team, which focuses on vulnerability management, penetration testing, red teaming types of exercises, which looks at doing pro forma types of attacks and testing of environments to test against kind of scenarios that would represent actual live types of attacks that will take place. And you'll see in today's session, especially from Keith Gregorio, an example of what those do. And then finally, a pink team that focuses on compliance-related things, institutional strengthening, major change programs to achieve target types of cybersecurity desired outcomes and target maturity states. I'll stop here now, and then Jaydeep, I'd like to hand over to you briefly so you can introduce today's panelists, both external and then yourself and Sunny internal in Omnibot. Okay, so Jaydeep, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, David, for setting the context introduction. First of all, warm welcome to all the audience. Very good morning, very good evening. So people have joined from different parts of the world. And first of all, again, very thankful to Paul BM, who was a former head of information security with London Stock Exchange, and he brings 30 years of experience. And he will be majorly focusing during the webinar on IDEM, the way it was implemented with London Stock Exchange. And it will be great to hear your experience, Paul. Welcome again. Keith Gregorio, who is head of information resilience at Light and Wonder, and has a 25 plus years of experience working with various organizations, from consulting to gaming and routers, etc. And he will be majorly focusing on the incident response and the kind of tabletop scenario, the red team based scenario. So warm welcome, Keith.
Thank you.
And then from our side, we have Sunny Modi, who is our Vice President, DevSecOps. He has joined before InfoPercept. He used to work with one of the gaming company, and he has built a large project on the cloud. So maybe he will be also sharing his experience of how security was handled while building the gaming platform. And a warm welcome again to David as well, who is going to moderate the entire webinar. And he brings huge experience in the financial industry and consulting industry. And he has been constantly helping us to evolve with our financial and the other services globally. So warm welcome, David, as well. And then finally, I'll also be talking on the offensive security approach that we take to build the cyber resiliency. And my name is Jaydeep Rupalia, part of InfoPercept. So again, handing it over to David.
Okay. Thank you, JD, for that. And welcome all of today's panelists. And again, hope for the audience that you're going to find it useful. So you may recall that the second topic that I noted at the beginning that we would cover would be talking about a few key precepts that are key enablers and almost prerequisites for effective cybersecurity practices and controls. The two key areas that we'll focus on today, first of all, as JD noted when he was talking about Paul Beim, is identity and access management, enablement and principles, which focus on enabling the ability to identify, authenticate, and authorize both internal users, and then the critical area that Paul will help focus upon, and the reason that he was involved in the key project at the London Stock Exchange Group when he was there in his prior role, was focusing on incorporating a large external vendor and contractor population into their IDAM capabilities. Obviously, that's quite important if you look at the right-hand side, because if you don't have appropriate IDAM capabilities, systems, controls, procedures, ineffective IDAM can provide a gateway for the commencement of events by internal actors. Secondly, it also may provide the capability, if you don't have appropriate IDAM systems, controls, or procedures, the ability for internal actors and external actors to link one to the other. And then finally, it also can provide a very open backdoor, whether you're talking about databases, whether you're talking about systems, whether you're talking about other processing systems, for external malefactors to hijack, take advantage, install malware, and what have you, in various critical assets of the organization. Secondly, the other key precept that we'll be focused on today with the external speakers, and Keith Gregorio will focus on this, is the second one on the left-hand side, vulnerability assessment and incident response. Keith will walk us through a tabletop exercise that he and colleagues of his at Light and Wonder composed and walked their organization through recently. That focus on essentially dealing with challenges to assets, networks, what have you.
Guys, I've lost audio on Dave.
Yeah, yes, I think we are not able to hear David. So maybe he has already talked about the kind of experience that you have and the kind of agenda that you are going to cover, Keith. So
the organization, ITU, looks at the use by individual departments or standalone end processes and certain cities, assets as aspects respond to an event in terms of time, deals whether or assets or process to the time to side. You see with and what have you. So I'll tabletop exercise, give you 30 seconds of context. Keith, you'll do the context on who Light and Wonder is and their relevance both to online gaming and then physical gaming globally, historically.
Certainly. Yeah, I'll take it from here, Dave. Thank you. Again, my name is Keith Gregorio. I currently work here at Light and Wonder and running their basically the business continuity and disaster recovery falls under what we term now resiliency or operational resiliency. So that is my space. As David was putting out there, we recently ran an exercise, and we do this on an annual basis. Do some sort of tabletop, to ensure we're covering our audit requirements and regulatory requirements around testing and maintenance. So this particular testing piece was kind of a hybrid where we pulled a security topic like ransomware, but we brought it into a business continuity / crisis management fold. And I will tell you this right up front, that is a lot to sort of bite off with the amount of time that we actually had. So, that's the whole, basically the whole piece on the exercise here. But I will step through quickly what Light and Wonder is. Essentially, is a gaming company made up of 3 major verticals. We have the land-based gaming. We have the digital side gaming, and we also own the company called SciPlay, which again is digital, basically mobile app games. On the land-based gaming side, Light and Wonder supports casinos with actual tables, with slot machines, if you will, EGMs as we call them now, because they're huge electronic gaming machines. Some of them stand 15, 20 feet high, and take a lot of work from our field services people to get them in and out of casinos and served at casinos. Again, you've also maybe seen video games and live video games at casinos. We create a lot of the equipment that is behind all of that, shufflers, stuff like that. And the 2 digital worlds, on the digital side with the studios, again, where it's legal, we have studios that are set up to serve gamers globally from a casino perspective. So a casino might sit in Malta, and if it's legal for you to play, you can play online at that casino from anywhere. So that's one of the pieces in the digital world that's always up and coming. And then on the SciPlay world, you've seen games like the Monopoly game that you can download onto your phone, and you don't even necessarily gamble there, but you spend money buying whatever the money is, the jewels are, whatever those are. So that's how the money gets spent, and people like to play those games on their phones. So those are the 3 main areas. Again, headquartered out of Las Vegas, Nevada, and growing. All of the company is doing really well, and been very pleased right now that's over 5,000 employees globally. All right, so hit the next slide, please. So again, back to what we were doing here, tabletop exercise, hybrid, where we, again, mixed it up with a ransomware scenario and also a business continuity and crisis management maintenance piece. So some of the things that we want to ensure that we get accomplished here for the organization is pull a lot of people together in a call like this and in a conference room on site. That's how we did this, but these could be done completely on calls, on video calls, and just take into account when doing something like this, if you have 50 people on a call and some of them need to come in, that can be a juggle. So breakout sessions are important and things like that. But what are we trying to do from a goals perspective? We want to first and foremost see what are we missing? What's the gap analysis? We put all these people together. We throw a scenario at them that they respond. what tools do they have in place to do that? Okay, that's probably first and foremost. What tools do they have in place, and what are they missing? And it's easily determined by the how the whole thing progresses. So what kind of communication tools are needed? What are we actually using? What are we making use of? A lot of organizations, when they change over to Teams, that can become a very powerful communications tool. But we have to make sure that everyone understands how to use it and leverage the various different things within that software. Key contacts that we should be interfacing with. So escalation, call trees, all the rest. That's information that will come out of the plans that we hopefully have been brought to the table when this occurs. Taking the inputs and improving the plan and process. Of course, the plan, do, check, act. So at the end of the exercise, we actually had a third party facilitate this. We had Optiv Security come in and facilitate, so we could have them do an external report. And that report basically outlines a roadmap of things that we all identified as needing to be done and needing to be rectified. So on the right side of here, the slide, basically just to condense the slides that I have, there's a series of ground rules, and these are the things that we would call out ahead of time, with the exercise. We don't want anyone holding back, if you will, during the exercise, so we're just encouraging everyone to play it as real as possible and, be open to all ideas. Okay, so that's basically what the ground rules are. So there are no rules, just come in, have fun with it, but be as realistic as you possibly can in terms of diving in. So go to the next slide, please. Okay, so it jumps in here. The next section that I have essentially is like 12 slides that we drove the exercise with, and I'm going to go very quickly through this. Some of the key points, though, and I think you're going to see this in later slides, are basically the functional areas and the timeline that we follow. You've got an assessment phase. Okay, so an incident occurs, you've got an assessment phase. Then we're looking at recovery itself from that. We're looking at the communications portion of that and a wrap up and review. So you'll see it in later slides. Basically, again, a plan, do, a check, to act, incident occurs, so on and so forth. Now, stepping through these, there's a lot of content, and we don't have the time here to go through each one of these. So I'm going to be go through very quickly. But we'll start off with the scenario itself. So what we have here is the person calls into the help desk saying, my computer is completely jacked, and I have a message telling me to pay money. So this is how we at least get started off. So we can go to the next slide. So the help desk is going to report on this now. The security incidents obviously should be reported to the office of the CISO. So there's already questions to be asked. How are they doing this? All right. How does it get from a NOC or a SOC or wherever it lands, coming out of maybe coming out of the work order system? How do they get it escalated? And now we have so many different means of doing this. It's even more important, now that we organize exactly how we want to funnel up or escalate up these processes. Okay. All right. So next slide. And each slide is going to build as we step through. So we would throw out at this point, okay, and you can follow the timeline on it. We did it in this case, with these dates were given, so we would basically impose onto a business process of financial reporting. So we have to report to the SEC, and they have to do it in a certain amount of time. So we made sure that this exercise interrupted that, just to make it more fun. So, and you can see that to start to formulate here. So you've got a timeline, and you have elements that are hitting, hitting the table. And what's happening here is that more employees are being affected. We're going to see a piece of this hitting the corporate accounting, who are the people who are doing the reporting. So it's going to be a problem. So next slide. Again, more questions coming out. What do we understand as immediate impact to the business at this juncture? Okay. And that's, again, this series of questions are asking those things. Who is involved? Is the crisis management team already, in place for this? Who on the executive teams will be notified? Are we far enough along to activate the senior portion of the crisis management team? What different mechanisms are being used, again, for communication? So those pieces, again, like I mentioned with Teams or whatever is being used, they need to be ironed out well beforehand. The time is not during an exercise or a real world event. Okay. So to the next slide, please. All right. So again, looking at impacts, we're already hitting a place now in the exercise where we've got employees not being able to do what they need to do. All right. And in this case, we're talking about quarterly closing. So again, business impact. What are the priorities now that we have this amount of people not doing that amount of work? What are the priorities that we as a crisis management team have to put in place, to organize going forward? And again, back to communications. Our communications are, as we can see right here in this video, there's always more difficult now that we are all working remotely at different times in different places in the world. If we're having a crisis, and David's role is a crisis management leader, we need to be able to hear him. So these things are the stuff that needs to be sorted out again beforehand. So moving forward. Recovery operations. All right, so now we're jumping into some of the technical portions. We've had this event, which has already given us a business impact, but what has really gone on? And again, I'll brush lightly on this. It was a ransomware event that we presented that hit the Oracle systems, okay? And we know that we have a certain element of disaster recovery or technical recovery available for Oracle, all right? And we broke out the DR plan, looked at it. We understand that we have an RPO of 2 minutes and an RTO of 12 to 15 hours, okay? So we need to have that application back up, preferably in 12 hours, but I gave it a bit of a window for this based on the DR plan. And we're gonna recover the data from the last 2 minutes. The point is the big question here is containment of the actual ransomware itself. And this is where, again, our security team needs to come into play and be able to isolate, evaluate, and decide how to move forward before we launch a DR plan. So this, again, is where things change in this type of scenario. We don't necessarily want to throw the switch and rebuild this machine and put it back online without understanding that we're reintroducing our ransomware to the network. So that's where obviously a large technology play comes into it, and we needed to be careful to catch that. So aligning our disaster recovery with the security check, is obviously a big deal here. So, and some of those questions get asked here at the end. We're already considering, do we actually pay this ransom? All right. Do we have insurance that will pay this ransom? All right. And that is a piece that is really relevant. Do we restore from backups? Okay. How are we going to avoid bringing the ransomware back? Is there anything else we can do? And who again is involved in these decisions? Now, in our case, our we already planned for this with insurance and the whole bit. We do have that covered, but I definitely found that between the disaster recovery and the security check, we weren't 100% sure if the ransomware would be recycled. So that was key. All right, so again, moving forward, please. I've talked about this already in terms of, do we pay this or not? Our insurance covers a set amount, that will be paid if we're over a certain amount of business interruption. So that is basically that in a nutshell. We'll take the next slide, please. And then the forensics investigation is spinning off from what we're doing in terms of isolating this ransomware. At this point, we fast forward and we bring HR into it, and we start to look at what went on. And it come to find out that in the scenario, we built this in as a disgruntled employee scenario. So the question there is how does HR work with the administrative, executive administration to further investigate this, and at what point does it get handed off, to an external security agency or the local authorities? All right, so we were taking this, into account. All right, so moving forward. So here at the another set of questions regarding the actions of the employee assigned to the response teams, the actions taken to limit the employee's actions or access to the network. Again, looking at the various different pieces from this disgruntled employee perspective. All right, and again, very likely kind of scenario, and that's why we built this in. Okay, because this kind of thing does happen. In a smaller environment, you might have people that have a lot more access to more areas. So in this case, we wanted to flush it all the way out again to the local law enforcement level, and actually have the contact points there and who we would actually speak to. So all of this was broken out there. So next slide, please. All right, so the after action review, essentially what we were doing, like I said, this was facilitated by a third party at this juncture of the exercise. After we kind of closed out that we had this disgruntled employee and they were dealt with, we basically just wrapped the whole thing up, and we were out of time. But going back and doing a top down, so it's like, again, here's the scenario. These were the tools brought to the table. This is what worked. This is what didn't work. Here's a timeline for fixing these things. So that was all gathered and put into a formal documentation. Some of the key points that I would definitely bring up as a facilitator is that we need to allow more time. Bringing executives into the room or onto the video, I know can be a daunting task to organize. And they'll tend to want to shorten it. But we tried to cram all of this into about 2 hour space, an hour and a half of actual talk through and 30 minutes of Q&A, and it was too compressed to get through. As you can see, just me stumbling through these slides right now. I've had to go through them very quickly, because of time. And it's hard to kind of grab onto the meat and potatoes, if you will, unless you give yourself the time. Right, so that's one of the major pieces that we had going forward for this year. To be allow more time or to condense the scope. Right, because again, this was pretty wide. We went all the way from mixing up a scenario with cyber, business continuity, and crisis, and we brought it all the way down to the disgruntled employee being turned over to the local cops. That's a lot of content. All right, so breaking it down into smaller segments is probably where I will take this next year. So for instance would be just do the Oracle disaster recovery with the security evaluation and leave it at that. something along those lines to give myself more scope and you know, a more thorough result. Okay. And you see a comment here about the full run. We actually did divide this up into 2 exercises because again, we knew that there was going to be too many people and too much content. So I basically divvied it up between the business users and the technology users, and we had two different times. So that did help, but again, it was still a lot of content in a short space of time. So that is it in a nutshell for me.
Okay.
So I don't know if I'm taking questions now or do we continue to move on?
Yeah, we'll continue to move on. We'll have the
I
questions at the end.
think we'll probably move on for now. Keith, thank you for that very well-rounded presentation. Thank you for that. And I just wanted to kind of link what Keith went over with some of the things that Paul will be focused upon. You've noticed from what Keith reviewed a tremendous amount of complexity between different jurisdictions where their business takes place. He cited the example and this was just a worked example of something that's registered in Malta or lodged in Malta as a game, but anybody in the world being able to access that. You can imagine the implications of that for identity and access management and entitlement and authorization purposes. And then we're talking also about very large volume of low latency transactions in what is at least a semi-regulated type of industry or business, but with different regulations for different jurisdictions and even with different type of participants, depending on whether you're professional or whether you're young or and inexperienced. So again, Paul will have faced somewhat similar issues, albeit predominantly with a professional population in the role that he had at the London Stock Exchange Group. And so I'll tie that over to Paul now to continue discussion focused on IDAM and hopefully some of what Keith went over in terms of the real live tabletop exercise and aspects of it. Paul, you'll be able to kind of comment upon how that relates to your experience in LSCG, elsewhere, and then with ID and AM in particular.
Great. Thanks, David. Identity Access Management has a number of acronyms. It could be IDAM or could also be IAM, which a number of folks call it as well. The tool is, the key benefit, as David is alluding to, is to control access to data and systems. The next item, the principle of least privilege. We want to give folks the access they need, the minimum access they need. We don't want to overstep our bounds. We don't want to give folks the ability to hit an Oracle system, as Keith was alluding to, or as the next piece says, segregation of duties. Having a developer have access to production systems is not something you typically would like to see. A huge example in the US happened in January during the FAA when the ground halt was caused because I believe it was a contractor, it's unclear whether it was a contractor or an employee, who actually went in and changed a file in both production and development systems and across the board, and it caused a ground halt across the country where no flights were taken off for 90 minutes, which was a huge mess. And that was mainly because of segregation of duties. The individual had too much access, too much privilege to do what he did, and he corrupted a file across databases across the primary system as well as the DR system. And it was a key example of too much access and someone not reviewing that person's access, which leads kind of to the next point, having a lot of analytics, understanding who has access to what, knowing who's attempted to access certain systems. Everyone has an employee ID or some kind of configuration that you're associated with your employee. So we can typically tie back, although folks can try to hide who they are or steal someone else's credentials. But using analytics, you can see where unauthorized access attempts were made. You can see where people have access to systems they probably should not have. And that can be fed into your SIEM system as well as another precursor for your cyber resilience. It's just another data point in the scene that identifies where potential applications or systems may become vulnerable should someone get access to not or not. And one of the key things we talk about managing recertification campaigns. When people think of IDAM, they think of heavily on logical access, so access to systems. What we did in LSEG is we actually tied it into our physical security system as well. So when you were onboarded, we gave you access to your ID card, and you got access to the front door of the building, perhaps the back door of the building, but you didn't get access to the data center because your job didn't require you to have access to the data center. So it's within an IDAM system, you can do more all-encompassing controls that folks previously had not really been aware of, and how you could tie it together with a common tool. So getting access to applications as well as physical access is a key thing of what the tool helps us with. And what we had to do within LSEG is you onboard applications into the tool. Many organizations have hundreds, if not thousands, of applications. Not every single application will be included in the IDAM tool, but hopefully the majority of ones will. And that helps you control who can have access and how you can do the reviews of that access. And quite simply, controls have to be for employees as well as contractors. And as we get into third-party risk, and I'll talk about it on the next slide, having control over contractors is a huge issue, and making sure when their access needs to be removed, reduced, etc., is a major part of how the IDAM tool is used. And for those of you who are auditors or have to deal with compliance, an IDAM tool actually, it helps support and simplifies compliance reviews as well, because it gives you automated information on who's accessing what. It supports, whether it's audit, it supports your GDPR compliance, SOX compliance, etc., because IDAM tools do help with data privacy and controls over that. Next slide, please. One of the key things we did at LSEG, and I think most organizations do this, is you integrate your IDAM tool with your HR system, whether it's Workday, PeopleSoft, whatever HR system you have, and it needs to be coordinated with your joiner, mover, leaver process. I cannot emphasize it enough. What we did is, from a joiner perspective, you're able to set up immediate roles for individuals when they know their start date is going to be the 1st of April. So on the 1st of April, that individual will have access to email, he'll have access to the company website, they'll have access to certain basic functionality based upon their job requirements. So you get role-based access. In an HR system, many roles can be defined with an ID, and that ID is associated with permissions that individual will have for both logical and physical. If I'm a data center manager, I need access to data center on all 7 by 24 hours, as well as certain systems. My role will state that, and that's when my access will be provisioned and given to me that way. So tying it to the joiner, mover, leaver process is extremely important. It turns access on, it turns access off. And the key thing, what we found, is within the mover process. For example, maybe I'm an HR manager, and I don't want to be in HR anymore. I move over to finance, or I move over to another position. If my position ID or role ID is not changed, the chances are I could still have access to certain sensitive or privileged information that has not been taken away from me, even though my job no longer requires it. So the mover process is something that's key, and many organizations, including ours, don't do it well. They missed that because it's easier just to continue to add on access than to remove access or review access. So tying access to a position or role helps identify what that individual really needs access to, including the physical access too. We also talk about automating application recertifications. Through an IDAM tool, you can periodically review who has access to what system. You can review it on a per person basis. So let's look at Paul's access and see if he has access to systems he shouldn't, or you can do it on an application basis. So assuming you look at the Workday application, let's see who has access to our HR system. You can do that recertification and look and see, hey, certain individuals in their role, they shouldn't have access to this anymore. And that access can be immediately revoked through the IDAM tool, or it can be requested to be revoked through a workflow or a process flow as well. So doing that on periodic basis based upon the sensitivity or criticality of the application is key. Certain systems, maybe you do it 30 days, every 60 days, quarterly, or even annually, depends upon how critical or essential that a system is. And doing those application reviews, especially, I'll just jump over with contractors, is even more important. We tied our application reviews, our HR system in with our contractor database. So knowing when a contractor, their contract is coming up for expiration, we would review that contractor's requirements 60, 30, 15 days out to make sure that on that contract end date, maybe their role is changing, maybe they're no longer going to be in the organization, that their access will be fully removed, both logically and physical access. So tying it into our contractor database, which meant working with our procurement division, was a key piece for us. It worked out really well. One of the things that we identified is many organizations, especially larger organizations, they typically have contractors managing themselves. Not necessarily a good thing. In order for us to do this properly, you had to have a company manager oversee the contractors. For argument's sake, you bring in Dell, you bring in PwC, you bring in various firms, and they have their own managers, and they can continue to give access to their own staff when perhaps they don't need it. Having a corporate person, someone or group that oversees your contractors is hugely important to make sure that their access continues along with the terms of their contract. And thus tying it into a contractor database helped us understand, was again, segregation of duty, least privilege, making sure that they had the access they needed. And that allows us to do periodic reviews. I mean, the reviews also can be for, in addition to making sure you have access, also permissioning access. We created workflows for individuals to get access to particular applications. So you can go in and request access to an application. When you first start, you may be able to self-service request. So I need access to certain internet or certain simple applications, like the cafeteria menu or something where everyone can easily get access to. Then as you get to more sensitive and critical application, it goes through a workflow. So it goes from your manager, perhaps the risk and compliance officer needs to be involved in, as well as the application manager, who they will also comment and say whether or not that person should be given access to that system or not. So the workflow is essential, making sure if you're going to automate this process that applications are reviewed by the proper people and access is not given to individuals who don't require access to those particular systems. And again, everything can get fed into your Steam system prior to doing that. Next slide. And just, some of more of the benefits that we've identified, a lot of dormant accounts you'll find when you look in an organization, especially one the size of ours, there are a number of accounts that probably laying out there that haven't been accessed in months or years. Whether it's assigned to a person or not, the key thing you do have to understand when you look and identify dormant accounts is whether or not it's a system account. Many times a system account, which logs applications on automatically, don't necessarily log in like an individual does on a daily basis. And you need to be very careful when you remove dormant accounts that it's not associated with a critical application or system, because that could break a process throughout as you go through, as the system needs to do its overnight processing and so forth. If you have a system account that you removed access to it, it could break that role. Again, going through the reviews, determining people who need to have their access or don't need access. Through an IDAM tool, you can turn access on. You can turn access on temporarily. All right, I need access for a weekend project. Paul will have access until 7 a.m. Monday morning, and then his access is automatically revoked. determining who needs access when is another thing that can do it. And one of the best things, and I know David is a big fan of this, having an audit trail and compliance of who has access to when. So you can see in an audit trail through the workflow, who approved my access, who removed my access, who denied me access. It can cause a few internal discussions, but it's a key thing that shows how your access was verified and how your access was removed. It enhances the onboarding and in particular the offboarding. A number of times you may have situations where employees need to be, in theory, walked out the door. Though you don't want them to know that, through the IDAM tool, you can set up a timing, you can set up things, you can shut off access, both logical and physical access, very quickly so that individual cannot do any damage should they be considered a disgruntled employee or something else. And again, it coordinates with physical access. Having security on board with your IDAM tool is a key thing, so it does. Even though a lot of people are working remote now, it helps with remote access as well. It can reduce who has access remotely to what systems and when, as well as physical access into your buildings. And I'll cut it off there since we're running out of time.
Okay, great. Paul, thank you so much. It was really, really helpful. There's just one point I want to emphasize that I think Paul pulled together very nicely. That I noted down. He talked about the need to design and execute on orchestrating, integrating, and collaborating between your IT systems, your business processes, and your people and their roles. I think that especially in the cybersecurity environment now, where you have a lot of different point solutions that do individual things but may not be fully integrated or orchestrated, that overarching precept in terms of architecture, planning, and executing and monitoring is a really key precept. And between what Paul has enunciated and Keith's very articulate walkthrough of a scenario-based tabletop exercise, those are the kind of key things that people want to take away to deal with the new requirements from the UK with the CBEST type of requirements focused on digital operation resilience, the UK DORA requirements that are very similar, and then evolving requirements similarly in the United States under the New York State Banking Commission Article 500, as well as some of the newer pronouncements by the US President more recently. So the next speaker is going to be Sunny Modi with the InfoPercept. The reason I wanted Sunny in on today's session is he very interestingly, the reason I'm seeing on session is he has worked on development of so he has applied experience in some of the design, build, and operate aspects of what Keith and Paul have talked about as well. And so I thought he'd bring an interesting angle, especially the SecDevOps kind of role in making sure that there's resiliency going forward. So Sunny, over to you.
Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. So I am currently practicing at InfoPercept, building the implementation and best practices for DevSecOps within the team, as well as we help the companies where we can solve their DevSecOps issues, and we can actually help them to plan and how we can implement it. Now, when we are talking about cybersecurity resiliency, we should take care of what would be my strategies and what could be the minimal impact that we can bear on the system. Now, to have this, what I believe is with help of DevSecOps approach that can integrate into the entire software development lifecycle, right from planning and coding to testing and deployment, so that by incorporating everything, security into the entire software development lifecycle DNA, the DevSecOps can help organization build more secure and resilient software. Now, when we say DevSecOps, people will talk about more and more tools and the technologies. What I believe personally is not only tools and technology, but DevSecOps is a practice and disciplinary action that can be introduced and implemented from the team right from start to moving forward. Next slide. So the question would be like, we have listened Keith and Paul related to their experiences so far. So when we say, okay, these are the problems, now how to address those problems? So I can define in very simple and easy approach that can be defined into few steps and moving forward. Now, firstly, when we see DevSecOps process or resilience, cybersecurity resiliency, the first is to prioritize security at every stage of the software development lifecycle. That means integrating security testing into development process, regularly testing and scanning for the vulnerabilities. This will help identity and address security issues early on, reducing risk of a major breach or disruption. Now, that second stage would be the implementation part. Once planning is there, we are implementing it. That is implementation of strong access control, which is already discussed by Paul, and data protection measures. Keith is very good explained about it, and that includes limiting access of sensitive data and implementing encryption and protect data both in transit. So we already heard about like where you want to spend, like in a backup plan or paying to ransomware. So that we have to think, and we have to build a proper implementation so that we cannot we should not pay to the ransomware. Now the third one is the control policies and control implementations, where we have to ensure that the incident response plan is in place in real time. That means having clear procedures for identifying and responding to security incidents, as well as regular planning and testing to ensure that your team is presented to respond effectively. So these are the three steps to be taken care. And when we are at the end of third step, normally people are forgetting moving forward part. So when we are building any software or any organization, the organization has to grow, the software has to grow. So finally, we have to stay up to date with the latest threats and security best practices. Cyber threats are continuously evolving, and it's important to stay vigilant and adapt your security strategy accordingly. That means when you are creating any software and you are putting security aspects into your DNA, that means wherever you have started, that is not going to be there moving forward. Technologies can change, your organizational need is changed, market needs are changed. So based on that, you have to continuously evolve this process again and again. So in summary, I can say that the plan, implementation, control, and continuous review. So this has to be practiced, and regularly the coordination of team has to be there, disciplinary action has to be there, and right tool at the right time has to be implemented. Next. So let me share my real experience with e-gaming industry. That was my previous experience when I was appointed to this challenge. Before that, the organization failed 6 times for go-to-market. So these were their 7th attempt, and we have started with very small team. So right from day one, I have implemented disciplinary action, who is doing what and what are their rules, because at the first day it was not very possible to implement this many tools and technologies. We have to focus on real problem, which is go to market. And for that, what I did, Jaideep was my friend, and then we talked with the InfoPercept, and we decided that, okay, let InfoPercept take the role of cybersecurity cybersecurity review and implementing best practices. Then we had a beta version ready, and right from beta version we had a surprise DOS attack, and surprisingly we had another attack which was privilege escalation back to back. But at that time we were into beta, and that was actually surprise given by one of the partner in the organization. So at that time we the DOS attack was real time detected and prevented by SOC team, because InfoPercept was involved right from beta launch. InfoPercept was involved 24/7 of monitoring with the AWS cluster. Now this privilege escalation, it was not very possible to implement all the checks related to software test coverage, but quickly we have taken up, and then we have applied all the test coverage checks, so that whatever we deploy in the next release, the all security related checks will be in place from code pipeline, and that has been taken care. So there is no single incident after that checks has been implemented. So we have moved to production. Now, when we went to production, after 1 month, we got DDoS attack, and again, InfoPercept 24/7 SOC team has identified and prevented it real time. So that time, I had a call in the morning, 2 a.m. that okay, this attack was happened and it has been taken care. So root cause analysis and everything has been submitted, and I had to continue my sleep. Now, then the business started growing. We had more and more partners joining in, and then there was a situation because of the organizational requirement that the software was built like a single tenant application. So when any new partner is joining in, the tenant has to be separated, and that way we grew more than our expectation. Within 1 quarter, we hit 40 different tenants, and that 40 different tenants required 40 different clusters and everything to be taken care. And then again, we had a meeting that okay, this 40 different tenants, and we are expecting more and more tenants to be joining in. So can we reduce it? And can we reduce, because we have to reduce the overall footprint and the landscape. Then we have implemented pure SaaS practices, where we have merged all the tenants database into one with horizontal splitting, and we have ensured that whatever data is there, the encryption and decryption keys are separate across the whole tenant, and it has been kept very secretly, so that what happened is, even if any of one tenant is compromised, that impact is not there with the another tenants. But fortunately, there is no incident related to this, but we are already covered for that. Now, after 6 months or so, what we thought, because right from beginning, in addition to security and all, we had implemented analytics that can actually check the transaction and all, and checks for the suspicious transactions. And we observed that there is a suspicious transaction from operation team. So there was some insider who made some tweak into the database because of accessibility of database. And we have identified very quickly and forensic done with uh, uh, investigation with logging and periodic database backup. That was case was explaining it, and we have identified and we have reverted all the problems that observed by our analytical tool. And moving forward, it is handling more than 100 domains in the production environment, and there is no security incident then after. Next, please. So this is how the high-level security diagram was there. So there was a transit gateway which is connected to all the tenants, and then we have reduced from 40 to 3 major tenants, that is control tenant, logging tenant, and then the application tenant, and that is taking care of segregation of duties, segregation of applications and all, and that is concluding that okay, if we prioritizing security at every stage, the software development lifecycle implementing strong access controls and data protection measures, having robust incident response plan, and staying up to date with latest threats and security best practices, organization can build a strong and resilient security posture. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sunny. That was very useful, and especially like the way aspects of your own experience brought together key points that Paul and Keith had raised in their presentations as well, and obviously you enriched it quite substantially given your applied experience. So finally, Jaydeep, our esteemed CEO, over to you to talk a bit more about how we focus on cybersecurity enablement, leveraging our platform InvenSense at InfoPercept.
Thank you, David. And thanks to Keith for sharing his experience talking about the kind of ransomware tabletop exercise. It was very interesting. Again, Paul talking about the identity access management and his experience. Again, a lot of things where we saw that there are controls, there are technologies, but we see a lot of challenges in terms of cyber attacks. So the way we as InvenSense help customers is to build the right strategy with attacker's mind and defender's brain. So we always keep talking about how do we solve this cyber security, cyber resilience challenge, be it the stock exchange, be it the gaming industry or any industry. The major challenge that is being faced is we have the incidents happening and then probably we are trying to solve it. But what we really believe is we should be doing certain simulation, what we call it as the offensive first approach, which allows us to attack the organization before the attacks are happening from the adversaries. And the way we look at the overall cyber resiliency as a framework, be it the NIST, which talks about from identifying to protect, detect, respond, recover. And again, World Economic Forum talking about the same framework, but what it refers is there will be incidents which needs to be identified. Once it is identified, you either protect or detect. And there are scenarios where adversaries will be successful and there will be incidents. And what you really need to do is you need to respond to it. You need to ensure that during the incident, you are able to sustain the organization and then finally recover. So that's the kind of framework which both NIST, World Economic Forum talks about. So to solve this major challenge, what we do is the offensive first approach. Maybe today we have already touch based the DevSecOps by Sunny all the organization, be it Keith talking about the gaming, so there will be a lot of cloud utilizations there. Then probably all the different compliances that needs to be addressed, be it the online gaming or the stock exchange. And then a lot of integration of tools has been already been discussed by all the speakers ahead of me. So what we really do is we'll have few use cases. I see that we are running late also, and a limitation of time as well. But what I'll do is I'll touch base various use cases where offensive first approach can be utilized to have a better DevSecOps, better cloud security. You can also do certain advanced simulation for meeting your compliance and the strategy requirements, and see how offensive first can be useful to check whether all the integration the industry is talking about is working fine or not. So that's the kind of approach that we take as InfoPercept. So maybe we have been hearing all the speakers, and we see all the industries evolving. We see transformation happening worldwide, be it any industry. Everybody is transforming. Some of them have already transformed, and some of them will transform. In this case, what we see is a lot of new age technologies like cloud platforms are being used. Sunny was referring to the diagram which talks about microservices will have Kubernetes, will have containers. If you look at the entire digital landscape, so it has started from on-premises data centers, then evolving from endpoint, social media, to the partner ecosystem, the mobile networks, the different clouds, and then probably the new age like the blockchain and metaverse. And the kind of business that would be there, when we talk about stock exchange, it's more B2B, where the landscape is very different. The kind of challenges that we see will be very different. When it comes to the industry like gaming, it could be both B2B, B2C. So again, the challenges with respect to security, with respect to privacy, will be completely different. And the challenges that we see is like all the new age companies bringing in their own platform and bringing in the interface. Those companies who are born in cloud, and probably could be a fintech, could be a regtech, or a lot of gaming innovation, which is an interface which talks to multiple organizations. So it carries a huge amount of data and a huge amount of integration with different companies. So this brings in a lot of complexity. We see it as complexity, we see it as an opportunity where the business can happen, the business can grow, the digital transformation. But for attackers, it's very simple. They still call it as the damn vulnerable landscape. So whatever we do, all in terms of the transformation, the new age technologies, the new age companies, but attackers still view it as damn vulnerable landscape. And to solve this problem and to have the right resiliency, what we really feel is you need to build a right journey. So cyber resiliency maturity also requires different steps to be followed, different areas to be addressed, from visibility to hygiene to different requirements, the testing, the architecting, and then probably it flows from where you are, which could be ad hoc to managed to optimized and adaptive, to reach to the adaptive stage and covering all the areas itself is a major task for organization. And same way, when we look at the overall maturity that needs to be built from SOC level 1 to level 5, it requires a lot of efforts from the initial to making a lot of repeatable tasks to define, to manage secure and optimize it. And the way the overall ecosystem has evolved is like in the security ecosystem specific. Uh, Earlier, it were very limited security technologies which were being used. Uh, Kind of 2 to 4 technologies where antivirus, the kind of firewalls and all were used. But then with time, it has evolved, the way the landscape has evolved also. So there are organizations who would be using more than 40 different cybersecurity tools and technologies to address their overall requirements. So that's the kind of security solution and the overall ecosystem that has built from limited and manageable to the interconnected and the complex one. And for us to really address this, referring what World Economic Forum talks about incident and then responding it, be it the stock exchange, which I am sure the subject matter expert has already covered in terms of the different threats that are there with the stock exchange as a industry, in terms of the different attacks that we see as a sophisticated attack, the kind of high volume and high speed transactions that would be happening, the complexity of the system, the regulatory requirements, and online gaming, from where you see DDoS, which Sunny was referring about, could be a personal getting involved and doing hacking and the cheating kind of scenario, the personal data breaches that can happen, the gaming scams and the frauds and the technical issues. But what can really help in all of this is do certain level of next level of offensive first approach to address the different scenarios. To start with, the DevSecOps, where it was very nicely addressed, where uh, the discipline was talked about, the DNA was talked about, the kind of the static code analysis that happens during the software development. You are addressing the different static code analysis, the kind of findings that you get. You do the dynamic testing during your development, and those are also getting addressed. But then what really is required is once you are live in the production, because adversaries are going to go all out and they're going to attack the organization. So what is really required to solve this DevSecOps and to build the right DevSecOps to address the cyber resiliency is we really need to attack the operations. And with this, you will be able to see how well we are able to protect, detect. If you are able to simulate a incident with the attack that you do, how are you able to respond, sustain, and recover? So this gives you a real life scenario to address, and you will be better prepared for the actual attacks. Same way, when we are talking about cloud security, again, it itself is very complex, where the major challenge that we see is who is responsible for what. Customer responsibility to the cloud provider's responsibility, and the overall landscape where the different kind of technologies are used, maybe the container, the serverless, the monolithic, and the growing microservices. So in this also, again, to address the cloud security requirement, even the European Central Bank is talking about the stress test. So you really need to conduct the stress test across the landscape to check whether are you able to secure or not. So that's the offensive first approach that we believe in. Tabletop exercise, very well addressed by Keith. Maybe I can take a real experience that I had during the event that we did very recently with operational technology, not the online gaming or the stock exchange, but I was talking to a CISO of a critical infrastructure. And what he said is, we do a lot of tabletop exercises where a lot of question-based approach is taken. But what is really required is to do a real simulation. So the simulation where the incident is simulated, we have our state level security being tested, to the regulators responding to the overall larger incident. So again, the offensive approach is something that will allow you to do the stress testing and see whether you are really prepared, whether you are able to address the requirement and making it more resilient. So that's the kind of offensive approach that can be taken on the tabletop as well. And again, everybody across is talking about the different integration. All the tools are integrated, and probably a lot of ways in which you'll have different incident response utilizing different integration. But again, to check whether these integrations of different tools are working or not, what we really do is, with the offensive first approach, is simulating the next level of attacks on the organization and see whether the playbooks, the kind of integrations that you have built are working fine or not. And if the incidents are successful, again, then you'll have to fine tune your overall strategy of protect, detect, and probably get more prepared on the response part. So that's how we believe that overall offensive first approach is something that can really help organization to see what can go wrong and probably help to better prepare in terms of the overall cyber resilience.
Okay.
So, David, over to you.
Yep.
I'm sure we have
Okay,
taken
great.
more time than this.
No, JD, thank you for that. JD, I don't know whether we're enabled to take any questions or not. I know we had about 10 minutes left, and obviously it's rather late your time. It's early in the morning for
No.
Keith and Paul, obviously. But whether you want to close here now or whether there's the ability to take any questions from the audience.
I think we had 2 polls to be addressed. Maybe that's something that we can do and then thank the audience is what
Okay. And you'll enable that from your end, I presume.
Sure.
Great. So obviously everybody that's online can see the question, and the interest is whether you have yet a specific strategy for cyber resilience overall, and especially for financial service institutions in the EU and EMEA, and then increasingly also for the United States. This is going to be increasingly important, and there will probably need to be, along the lines of what Paul was suggesting, your auditors will probably be interested to know whether you have somebody designated, and if you don't have somebody designated, why you don't. So if you can go ahead and indicate your responses on this, and we'll be able to then feed back fairly quickly, I think, what the what the feelings are among those that are still online. Good. So that looks good. The not sure, obviously, if the folk that voted not sure can just check back and see whether you do. But that's actually a pretty positive outcome, I would say. If 2/3 of you are pretty certain that your organization does have somebody, again, specifically for cyber resilience, this is maybe slightly different from just general IT resilience overall. But again, it's still a good indicator that you're thinking in a forward way along the lines of what the panelists have suggested, and obviously JD kind of went on and articulated as well just previously. So JD, I guess we have one more poll for the audience, correct?
Yeah, correct.
One more poll question? Okay, and this is saying, considering your industry vertical, do you think the offensive type of security approach that JD outlined will help in building better cyber resilience overall, rather than just internal, more defensive focused resilience approaches only? And again, this is an either or. You either agree that offensive is maybe better to build cyber resilience, or you don't agree, not necessarily so. So if you can just indicate one response, and then we'll feed back to you what the audience's preferences or disposition is. Oh gosh, even better. Okay, fine. So all of you are very positive that thinking about offensive will result in building better overall cyber resilience, 4 out of 5 on average, which is obviously for JD, I'm sure he'll feel very positive about that. So I think what we probably want to do, JD, is close here. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, fine.
No.
So, and I know it sounds like you maybe are coming down with something, so make sure you take care of your health. We'd like to thank everybody that joined us today on the webinar. I hope you found that it's been as useful as we have done. I'd like to thank personally long-term colleagues, Keith and Paul, Keith in particular for waking up at the crack of dawn, US Pacific time, Paul for maybe carving himself out of any snow that there might be in Colorado, and then Sunny and JD for staying up so late IST time. And if you want to follow up with any of us from InfoPercept further on this, you can either email JD at jdr@infopercept.com, or myself, David Perez, at davidp@infopercept.com. Again, thank you all for joining us today. Thanks to all the panelists for preparing so comprehensively and contributing so successfully. And we look forward to welcoming you again to another webinar in the future. Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Guys,
David. And
good to
thanks
see
to
y'all.
Paul and
Thank
Keith
you.
again. And thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks.